Get a handle on the hundreds of trashed RVs that are just showing up on city streets, many with homeless people living inside.
Forget the stereotypes. The fastest growing homeless group in America isn't people without jobs. It's people with jobs. Millions are now living in parking lots, RVs, and subleased rooms because housing costs exploded while wages stalled. And it's happening quietly in every state, from big cities to towns you've never heard of. For most working Americans, the biggest economic betrayal of the last decade is simple. Their paycheck stopped growing, but their bills didn't. Between 2020 and 2026, average rent in the United States jumped 30 to 50% nationwide, and in some cities like Miami, Austin, and Phoenix, rents climbed more than 60% in just a few years. But median wages grew only about 4 to 6% per year, and after inflation, many workers actually lost purchasing power. The result? Millions of full-time workers can keep their jobs, yet fall further behind every month. A typical renter now needs to earn $29.71 per hour to afford the national average rent for a one-bedroom while staying within the common rule of budgeting 30% of income. But the national average hourly wage for service workers, the backbone of America's economy, is still $16 to $20 per hour. Even teachers, nurses, and retail managers often share the same struggle. This gap is why housing insecurity is exploding, not because people don't work, but because the system is mathematically impossible for them to win. When 40% of Americans say they could not cover a $400 emergency without borrowing or selling something, it proves the crisis isn't personal failure, it's structural collapse. Wages no longer match the cost of staying housed, and that is the root of the new working homeless class. The United States housing shortage isn't a rumor, it's a documented structural deficit. Economists estimate that America is short somewhere between 4 million and 7 million housing units, and that gap grows every year. This shortage began more than a decade ago, when construction slowed dramatically after the 2008 housing crash. Builders stopped building, small firms went bankrupt, and labor left the industry, and it never fully recovered. Fast forward to 2026, and America is still struggling to add enough homes. Meanwhile, population growth, migration to booming cities, and millennial family formation applied pressure from the other side of the equation. Basic supply and demand take over. Too many people chasing too few homes drives prices upward, not slowly, but explosively. Cities like Denver, Nashville, Boise, Austin, and Tampa doubled their population inflows without doubling housing. Even places once considered affordable, Ohio, Tennessee, Alabama, are now seeing bidding wars. And when new houses do get built, they often target the luxury market, not working families. Developers follow profit, and profit means apartments at $2,200 per month instead of $1,000 starter homes. This shortage ensures that rents stay brutal and homeownership remains out of reach. With millions of homes missing, people don't choose RVs, cars, motels, or doubling up with family. They simply ran out of options. A hidden force is reshaping the housing market: corporate landlords. Since 2011, large investment firms, Blackstone, Invitation Homes, American Homes for Rent, and others, began buying single-family homes by the tens of thousands. Instead of regular families enjoying a chance to buy a house, all-cash investors often swooped in and outbid everyone. In some markets, Wall Street buyers accounted for 20 to 30% of available homes. Why does this matter? Because instead of allowing families to build equity and generational wealth, these corporations turn homes into rental profit machines. Rents are raised aggressively, fees are stacked, and tenants report worse maintenance while paying more than a mortgage would cost. With corporations holding huge property portfolios, starter homes no longer circulate back into the market. They stay locked as long-term rental assets. This practice inflates prices by shrinking supply and pushing everyday buyers into permanent renter status. The math shows it clearly. In Atlanta, corporate ownership jumped from 0% to 18% of all single-family homes in only a decade. Zillow reports that in many metro areas, typical mortgage payments doubled since 2020, but investor demand never slowed. Instead of home ownership being a path to the middle class, young workers are competing with hedge funds. And when corporate money wins, the everyday American loses, paying more for less and trapped in rent cycles that were never designed for long-term survival. A decade ago, Airbnb seemed harmless, a way to rent a room for extra cash. In 2026, it has become a major driver of the housing crisis in many cities. Tens of thousands of apartments that would normally house local workers are now being operated as short-term hotel units, especially in cities like Honolulu, Las Vegas, Nashville, Orlando, San Diego, New Orleans, and Miami. Studies show that when just 10 to 15% of rentals convert to Airbnbs, the price of rent for everyone else rises by up to 20%. In tourist-heavy areas, more than 30% of housing stock has been removed from long-term rental availability. Landlords can make $3,000 a month renting to weekend tourists instead of $1,800 from a long-term tenant, and thousands are choosing profits over residents. This shift leaves local workers, teachers, servers, baggage handlers, nurses, retail staff with nowhere to live near where they work. Cities are responding, but slowly. Some have introduced caps, taxes, or zoning rule changes, but enforcement lags years behind the market. The domino effect is ugly. Fewer rentals lead to higher rent, more displacement, longer commutes, and rising homelessness. Meanwhile, Airbnb listings keep multiplying in places where housing is already scarce. The working class is being priced out of their own communities not because they failed economically, but because the housing they need is now functioning as a hotel industry monopoly. Even if rent hadn't exploded, everything else has. The last few years produced the fastest inflation spike in 40 years, and everyday essentials have not just risen, but doubled in many cases. Groceries climbed 25 to 35% since 2020, depending on region and basket. Gas prices fluctuate, but millions of commuters are still spending $50 to $90 per tank, often 2 to 3 times a week. Health insurance, deductibles, and medication copays are rising faster than wages as well. Car loans hit insane levels. The average payment is now $735 per month for new cars, and over $550 for used cars. Many Americans now spend more keeping a car running than previous generations paid for their mortgage. All these increases compound on top of rent. A budget that used to work even 5 years ago simply doesn't stretch far enough in 2026. That's why 58% of households report living paycheck to paycheck, and 28% of full-time workers say they worry about food insecurity at least once a month. Inflation didn't just make life expensive, it wiped out the breathing room people relied on to avoid financial disaster. Working full-time no longer guarantees stability. It merely delays collapse. A major shift in the workforce is hiding behind this housing crisis. Millions of Americans are full-time workers, yet they don't have full-time pay, hours, or benefits. Gig and contract jobs, Uber, DoorDash, Instacart, Amazon Flex, temp warehouses exploded after 2020 and now account for over 36% of the workforce by 2026. But most gig jobs pay $12 to $18 per hour after expenses, and none guarantee consistent hours. Workers are technically employed, but they don't qualify for company health insurance, retirement plans, paid sick time, or unemployment benefits. Many juggle 2 to 3 jobs just to hit 40 hours. That's why so many can't save first-last security deposits to get into stable housing. When rent is due monthly, but income arrives unpredictably from multiple gig apps, budgeting becomes survival math. Gig workers often pay expenses regular employees never think about. For delivery drivers and rideshare workers, these costs can eat 30 to 40% of gross earnings, turning a $20 per hour shift into $12 of real income. The economy shifted risk downward. Employers get labor without commitment, and workers absorb all the uncertainty. This is why full-time employment doesn't mean stability anymore. Millions are in a race just to stay afloat, scrambling every week for enough deliveries or rides to cover rising rent, and failing to break out of the paycheck-to-paycheck trap. The average American household entered 2026 with record-breaking debt, and not because families went on vacations or bought luxury items. For millions, credit cards became a survival tool, filling the gap between wages and the basic cost of living. Total credit card balances passed $1.3 trillion, the highest in United States history, and delinquency rates climbed sharply as interest rates hit levels nobody imagined a few years ago. Credit card APRs now average 22 to 29%, with millions paying 30% or more. That means a $1,000 emergency becomes $1,400 to $1,700 within a year if it's not paid off, and with wages flat, many can't pay it down. Roughly 60% of Americans carry a balance month to month, And for working renters, the average balance is $7,200 to $10,000. This debt crushes housing options. Landlords often deny applicants with high credit utilization or missed payments. Even those accepted face deposits that run 1 to 3 months' rent, money most working families no longer have. The more people rely on credit to survive, the deeper they dig into financial quicksand. The crisis isn't that Americans are irresponsible, it's that their income no longer covers modern survival. For more than 40 million Americans, student loans dictate how much is left for housing, and often the answer is not much. As payments resumed after temporary pandemic pauses, millions lost $200 to $500 every single month from budgets already stretched thin. Some owe far more. Average balances for borrowers aged 25 to 40 now sit between $32,000 and $48,000, with many over $100,000. This has turned student debt into a housing crisis multiplier. People who work full-time and earn decent money still struggle because a chunk of income is auto-drafted before rent is even due. Data shows that 1/3 of borrowers say student loans now force them into cheaper or unstable housing arrangements, doubling up, moving into RVs, or living farther from work. Student debt also delays homeownership. The average first-time homebuyer age is now 36, the oldest in United States history, up from 29 in the 1980s. With high DTI, debt-to-income ratios, lenders deny applications or approve smaller loans that can't compete with investor bids. The system has turned higher education, once a path to economic stability, into a drag that keeps millions permanently renting. The cruel irony: employers demand degrees, but the cost of those degrees prevents workers from building the very stability they studied for. Student loans didn't just depress savings, they pushed millions into the fragile edge of housing insecurity. One of the most deceptive pieces of this crisis is that unemployment numbers don't reflect reality. Millions of Americans are technically employed, but they're not getting enough hours to survive. Retailers, restaurants, warehouses, and call centers increasingly rely on on-call scheduling, cutting shifts last minute, or offering only 25 to 30 hours a week, just low enough to avoid full-time benefit requirements. This leaves workers with inconsistent paychecks and no ability to plan rent, groceries, or childcare. Employers call it flex staffing, but for workers it means a rent check that used to take 2 weeks of work now takes 3, if they're lucky. In 2026, over 44% of hourly workers reported having their hours reduced at least once per month without warning. This phenomenon has created what economists call the hidden unemployed, people counted as employed, but without consistent income. These workers often try to fill the gaps with gig jobs, credit card debt, or personal loans. But there's only so much time, and burnout is real. Meanwhile, inflation and rent don't adjust downward when hours shrink. Housing markets assume workers are receiving 40 hours of pay. When schedules fluctuate, even a single bad pay period can trigger late fees, eviction notices, or homelessness. For millions, it's not lack of work, it's lack of stable work that's pulling the rug out from under them. Between 2020 and 2022, millions of Americans survived the economic downturn only because temporary safety nets existed. Eviction bans, stimulus checks, emergency unemployment boosts, paused student loans, and expanded food assistance. Those programs were not perfect, but they prevented mass homelessness during a critical moment. Once they expired, the fragile reality of America's working class was exposed. Eviction moratoriums lifted nationwide. Landlords who were legally blocked from raising rent suddenly increased prices aggressively to recoup lost time. Simultaneously, enhanced unemployment vanished, returning benefits to pre-pandemic levels that do not match today's cost of living. Food stamp eligibility shrank, cutting off millions just as groceries reached all-time highs. In 2026, the United States has no federal safety net comparable to pandemic-era support, yet living expenses are 30 to 70% higher than before. The result is predictable but brutal. Eviction filings surged 30 to 50% above 2019 levels in dozens of cities, and shelters are overflowing with working adults who would have been housed a year or two ago under expanded protections. The pandemic didn't create the crisis, it revealed it. Millions were already one missed paycheck away from disaster. Pandemic relief delayed the collapse by a couple years. Now that lifelines are gone, America is seeing the true scale of economic vulnerability hidden behind the illusion of employment. One of the most invisible forces draining workers' budgets is the rise of municipal fees, taxes, and service costs. Even when rent doesn't go up directly, the price of simply existing in a city does. Utility districts, waste management, water departments, inspection offices, and transit systems have all increased rates since 2020, often by 20 to 40%. Here's what it looks like for everyday people. Water and sewer bills rising from $60 to $120 or more per month, trash and recycling service fees added to rent, residents paying $1,500 or more per year in local sales tax increases, $100 to $300 annual car registration or inspection fees, and parking tickets and towing growing into revenue sources. Some cities issue 500% more citations than 2015. Property taxes also drive up rent. When landlords face a 10 to 25% increase, they pass every dollar to tenants. Add required administrative fees, security charges, pet deposits, and background checks, and the cost of moving or staying rises each year. The city budget squeeze trickles down hardest on renters making under $60,000 per year, often teachers, nurses, service workers, and retail employees. This burden forces families to move farther away from urban cores, increasing commuting costs, stress, and time poverty. The result? Even full-time workers earning steady salaries see affordable living space slip away with no way to opt out. For decades, homelessness was seen as a Los Angeles, San Francisco, or New York problem. But in 2026, the crisis has spread nationwide, hitting small towns, suburbs, and rural regions at rates never seen before. Cities like Tampa, Boise, Spokane, Austin, Knoxville, Colorado Springs, Reno, Tulsa, and Salt Lake City reported double and triple-digit increases in homelessness since 2019. Part of the shift is migration. People priced out of major metros fled for cheaper states, only to find rising rents waiting for them too. Boise rent jumped 70%, Austin 65%, Tampa 55%, forcing workers who moved for relief into the same trap they escaped. Once affordable states, Idaho, Montana, Tennessee, Alabama, Ohio, Oklahoma are now eviction hotspots. Rural homelessness looks different. Fewer tent cities, more families living in cars or RVs, couch hopping, motels paid weekly, sleeping in storage units or parking lots. The most alarming trend: nearly 40% of newly homeless adults have full-time jobs. Shelters nationwide are reporting record demand, while many have waiting lists, something almost unheard of 10 years ago. The crisis grew faster than infrastructure. There aren't enough emergency shelters, rental assistance programs, or affordable units anywhere, not even in places that once claimed immunity. Homelessness has become a national working-class epidemic, not a coastal outlier, and no community is untouched. The modern working homeless crisis is showing up most visibly not in tents, but in cars, vans, RVs, and cheap motels. When people can't keep up with rent increases, they're not instantly on the streets. They move into vehicles. Today, more Americans live in vehicles than at any time in United States history. Estimates show up to 1.5 million people are living in cars, RVs, vans, and trailers. Over 600,000 full-time workers sleep in vehicles while holding jobs. Extended stay motels in some cities are 90 to 95% occupied by working families. Parking lots behind Walmart, Planet Fitness, casinos, and truck stops have become informal communities. RV parks that used to serve vacationers are turning into last-stop housing for laid-off or underpaid workers. Some cities report families living 5 or 6 deep in one RV, often without heat or working plumbing. Meanwhile, motels that once cost $45 a night now charge $75 to $110, which still feels cheaper than rent because they require no deposit, no lease, and no credit score. But long-term, motel living becomes the most expensive form of shelter, costing $2,400 to $3,300 per month for a single room. This is not a fringe lifestyle or a choice for adventure. It's survival. People are working full-time, doing everything right, and still ending up sleeping in the backseat of a vehicle. Eviction courts across the United States are overwhelmed in 2026. In dozens of metro areas, filings are 30 to 50% higher than before the pandemic, and in places like Houston, Las Vegas, and Phoenix, they've jumped over 70%. What's driving the explosion isn't just non-payment, it's the tightening of every screw in the rental process. Landlords used to give grace periods or payment plans. Now, many file eviction notices the first day rent is late, sometimes even when tenants have partial payment. Fees stack quickly. Late penalties of $100 to $200, daily charges, court costs, plus removal orders. One bad month triggers a financial death spiral, pushing renters out before they can catch up. Renters also face stricter screening, higher minimum credit scores, often 650 or more, income requirements of 3 to 4 times monthly rent, double deposits, sometimes exceeding $4,000. Once evicted, families carry a mark that landlords treat like a criminal record. People displaced by eviction often end up doubling up with family, moving into cars or RVs, switching to motel living, or leaving their communities entirely. The cruel reality is that eviction doesn't require criminal behavior, just a cash shortfall. Today, one car repair, medical bill, or cut work week can trigger permanent displacement. The system gives workers no margin for error, and the housing market punishes anyone who slips. Millions of Americans qualify for rental assistance, but almost none actually receive it. Housing Choice Vouchers, Section 8, are supposed to help low and middle-income families rent in the private market. But demand is so overwhelming that only 1 in 4 eligible families get a voucher. In many cities, the wait list is 5 to 10 years, or closed entirely. Even families who beat the odds struggle to use vouchers. Landlords increasingly refuse them, claiming administrative burden, delays, or discrimination masked as policy. Some cities report that 40 to 60% of awarded vouchers expire unused because renters can't find a landlord willing to accept them within the deadline. Rental caps set by HUD also fail to match real-world rents. In some markets, the voucher pays $1,600 for an apartment that costs $2,200 or more, leaving even assisted tenants short hundreds per month. Meanwhile, emergency rental aid introduced during the pandemic dried up, leaving almost no intervention available. Shelters are maxed out. Affordable housing projects take 5 to 10 years to complete. Families fall through the cracks long before help arrives. The safety net exists on paper but not in practice. The result is millions forced into unstable living arrangements despite being technically eligible for assistance, highlighting a social support system decades behind the scale of today's housing crisis. Another factor squeezing housing supply is demographic, and largely overlooked. For decades, older Americans downsized into retirement communities or stayed in paid-off homes. That trend has reversed. Many boomers now sell homes and enter the rental market, especially in high-cost states like California, Washington, New York, and Florida, where property taxes or insurance make owning unaffordable. More retirees renting means more competition for the same supply, and seniors often have advantages over younger renters: higher credit scores, cash reserves, steadier fixed incomes, and fewer dependents. They win bidding wars, qualify for units workers can't, and push rents higher unintentionally. Additionally, aging boomers aging in place are not freeing up starter homes. Nearly 80% of homeowners over 60 say they plan to stay put, meaning fewer resale opportunities for younger families. Meanwhile, multi-generational housing is rising out of necessity. Young adults move back home, not because they aren't working, but because rent consumes 40 to 60% of take-home pay. The math tightens even further as 10,000 boomers retire every day, many moving into rental-heavy cities with warmer climates. In places like Phoenix, Tampa, and San Antonio, seniors entering the rental market are one of the fastest-growing tenant groups. This generational bottleneck means working adults are being edged out of housing by retirees who used to be homeowners, one more force driving working families into cars, RVs, or instability. For most of United States history, full-time work plus patience equaled home ownership. That equation no longer exists. The median home price in 2026 is now over $420,000, up from $284,000 in 2019. Mortgage rates jumped from 3% to 6 to 7% or more, doubling monthly payments. A home that cost $1,400 a month now costs $2,800 to $3,200, pricing millions out. Meanwhile, the down payment hurdle is enormous. The average 20% deposit needed is now $80,000 to $100,000, and most Americans have under $5,000 in savings. With savings rates crushed by rent, car payments, and inflation, homeownership is drifting out of reach for an entire generation, not due to lack of work, but lack of margin. This changes everything. Renting becomes permanent, families delay children, wealth building stops, retirement security evaporates, social mobility freezes. Once, housing functioned as the core of the middle class, a forced savings account that grew wealth over time. Now, investors, rising costs, and policy failures transform housing into a pay-to-play system. First-time buyers are being replaced by corporations, foreign capital, and cash-backed developers. The grim truth is millions of full-time workers are not failing the system. The system has stopped supporting the idea of working your way into stability. Without policy, building, or wage overhaul, the American dream is no longer a promise, it's quickly becoming a museum relic. America's working class is being pushed to the edge, and the edge is getting crowded. Are you seeing this in your city? Are rents rising? Are people living in RVs, motels, or cars near you? Your stories shape these videos, and we read everyone. And don't miss our next episode, where we uncover how cities are cracking down on vehicle living and what happens when even the last affordable option disappears.